Welcome to Living Beyond Vision with AJ. Greetings, everyone. Jesus taught me about the inverse square law and how it relates to unidentified aerial phenomenon, aka UAP, aka UFO. And he taught me this through an end time dream that he gave me. And I need to share this with you. So let's get started. Okay, so I had this dream on December 1st, 2024, and I had to do a lot of research, and uh, I'll show you what I came up with. So here's the dream. Okay, so the first scene, there were like different scenes in my dream, and the first scene was round lights. Like I was in bed. I woke up and I looked out the window and it was dark out, but it wasn't real dark. It was in the middle of the night, but it was kind of dusk dark. It wasn't like real black outside. And there were these lights in the sky that were like moving from left to right, and they were just like going across the sky, these lights, and they were like little lights. And yeah, they were just shooting through the sky. And it was it was beautiful. I was overlooking um well, the outdoors were beautiful. The I'm not saying that the lights that were going through the sky were beautiful. It was like grass and trees, and so it was like actually happening in beautiful scenery. Okay, so the second uh the second um scene in my dream now were these lights that had been going through the sky. They turned into like buckets. Like these buckets were C-shaped buckets, and they were in the sky, and they were like slowly moving down now, and it was like symmetrically moving like a step and repeat. Um, and they were C-shaped buckets, like I said, and they almost look like those uh those things that are on the end of a bulldozer, almost, you might say. Okay, so while these buckets were moving, I heard an amplified man's voice from one of the transporters. I'll call them transporters. And he said to another person, a man, um, but of course they weren't, they were supposed to be like aliens, you know. And he said to another, "Your claim is true." And then he continued, "I hope that the people," and then I couldn't figure out the rest of it, but um I couldn't hear the rest, but he was alluding to hoping that the people believe the deception when the deception is presented. Um, there were a lot of those transporters, and it was my understanding in my dream, it was my understanding that they did this every night while we were asleep. These transporters were in the sky. Okay. Now, the next scene in my dream is okay, now the transporters have hit the ground, and when these bucket-like transporters reached the ground, they turned into tall sizzlers, like really, really tall. And they look like fireworks with bright yellow sparkles. And I tried to take pictures of it at that point, but I couldn't. Because my camera wouldn't work. I grabbed my camera and I'm like taking pictures of these sparkles in the on the ground, and my camera wouldn't work. It was like so slow, and so by the time that I got the picture, it was between transitions because these things were like transitioning. First, it was the white the white dots, the white lights, and then it was the bucket light, uh, and then it turned, and then it transformed into these sizzlers, right? So I also tried to, so when I was taking the picture, I could only take like it transforming into something else, so I never got a clear picture. So I also tried to wake up my son to look, but he didn't wake up. He like sat. I'm like, look, look, look. And he was like in a bed, like next to my bed in my room. And so I was waking him up and I was like, look, look, look. And so he sat up on the edge of his bed and he never woke up all the way. He just sat there like half asleep and he never was able to see what I saw. Um, so, um, so that's what was happening next was the Sizzlers. And then after that, in the fourth scene, now these Sizzlers, like they raised up and they transformed into these sea-like shapes. They're kind of like they're backwards, they were like backwards seas, and they were like circles, circles, circles. And these circle-like clusters reminded me of crop circles. Okay. So, crop circles, you know how they relate to or they're associated with aliens, right? These crop circles in these big fields, they're associated with aliens. Okay, so um in my dream, I looked at my clock. And so I could tell people like what time this all happened. Like I'm like I have to tell people that this is happening and I have to look at the time to tell them what time this happens. And when I looked at my clock in my dream, it was 3:17 a.m. Okay. Next. So the next scene in my dream, okay, so now these have risen up, these C-shaped clusters, and now they're at the top. They're very high in the sky, and they are now um, backward shaped square root symbols. So these are square roots. That's exactly what it looked like in my dream, these symbols of square root symbols. And all these shapes were like golden, yellowish, orangey, that colors. Um, so that's why I drew it that color. And so I'm like, these are square roots, but these are backwards square roots. Okay, so now I wake up from my dream and it's 6:15 a.m. in real life. Okay, so now I am going to go over the interpretation of my dream. So here we go with the interpretation. Okay, so the first thing I do is I research square root. Okay, square root, square root. That had such a deep impression on me, the square root symbols. So I look that up. And so I look up reverse square root and I find it. And so a reverse square root, the reverse square root, it's the reverse function of a regular square root. And then it gave me some examples. So I keep digging for more information. And now I find inverse square law. So what is it? What is inverse square law? Inverse square law is this law explains the strength of light with respect to the distance of the source. So there's a source of light. Um, the inverse square law states that, and I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see this better to read it to you. Okay. The intensity of the radiation is inversely proportional to the square of the distance, or the intensity of the light to an observer from a source is inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the observer to the source. As per this law, light loses its brightness or luminosity as it moves away from the source. For example, when you switch on the light in one corner of the room and when you move away from the source, the light appears dim or less bright due to an increase in the distance away from the source. So it gave a a picture showing what the source and how is the further away it goes, it could be like uh, an inch, a quarter an inch, a ninth of an inch. Is as it goes, as it moves away from the light source, it gets dimmer. So the intensity of what you're seeing decreases. Okay. So that is inverse square law. That's the law that it decreases as it gets further away from its light source. So inverse square law, let's do the recap. Okay, the inverse square law is a physical law that describes how the intensity of a quantity decreases as the distance from its source increases. So examples, the inverse square law applies to many physical quantities, including light. The intensity of light decreases as you move away from the light source. This is why subjects closer to a light source have harsher shadows and the light dissipates more quickly. And it applies to radiation as well. So the radiation exposure from a point source decreases as you move away from it. Okay. So what does this have to do with my dream and these things that I was seeing? Okay, let's continue. So we see lights in the sky. You know how we've been seeing lights in the sky, and I've seen many videos on how people are seeing these round lights in the sky, just like in my dream. I saw those lights. And people are seeing that, and then they just disappear all of a sudden, right? They see these lights. You can look at so many videos of how that people have taken of these lights in the sky, and then they just all of a sudden disappear. Why do they disappear? Hmm. Okay, so that's kind of like that inverse law, square law, where the further away from the source, then it it decreases in visibility. Okay, so driven by inverted square laws. So these things are driven by the inverted square laws, laser shows and holograms. So laser shows utilize radiation, specifically light radiation in the form of laser beams, as the term laser itself stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. However, when used in a controlled environment like a laser show, the radiation is considered safe and within regulatory limits, provided proper safe measures are taken. So laser definition, a laser produces a highly concentrated beam of light, which is considered a form of radiation. So a hologram is radiation is used in the creation of holograms, specifically in the form of coherent light from a laser, which is considered a type of electromagnetic radiation. This light is essential for generating the interference patterns that form a hologram. So laser light, most commonly visible light from a laser, is used to create holograms because it provides a highly coherent light source, meaning the waves are very well And my picture is covering the rest of that. Phase and amplitude, crucial for interference. So inverted square law is used in laser shows and holograms. So there's a light source where they have where the laser comes from for these laser shows in these holograms. And then, so the further out this light source goes for these shows, these holograms and laser shows, the dimmer it gets. Do you know where I'm going with this? Okay. So the similarity of laser shows in holograms. Laser, a device that stimulates atoms or molecules to emit light at particular wavelengths and amplifies that light, typically producing a very narrow beam of radiation. The emission generally covers an extremely limited range, visible, infrared, or ultraviolet wavelengths developed with highly varied characteristics. Laser is an acronym for light amplification by the stimulated emission of radiation. Now, hologram. Holography means of creating a unique photographic image. So, holo- holography is a means of creating a unique photographic image without the use of a lens. The photographic recording of the image is called a hologram, which appears to be an unrecognizable pattern of stripes and whorls, but which, when illuminated by a coherent light, as by a laser beam, organizes the light into a three-dimensional representation of the original object. So, yeah, a hologram is a light show, okay, of objects. So, here are images from Britannica of how this light source images, how they work with laser shows and holograms. There's a light source, and then it disperses and it gets further away. And again, as it gets further away, it gets less in intensity and it can disappear, like the laser show, like the lights that people are recording and in the sky, and then they're disappearing. They just all of a sudden disappear. Okay. Okay, so now what is the C? The C in my dream. Remember those circles, those light circles, the pattern turned into like C buckets, and then they turned into like crop looking circles in a C shape. So I was like researching, well, how does the C connect with the inverse square law? So I found the answer to that. So the C in inverse square law stands for Coulomb's law and Candela. So Coulomb's inverse square law, or simply Coulomb's law, is an experimental law of physics that calculates the amount of force between two electrically charged particles at rest. This electric force is conventionally called the electrostatic force, or Coulomb force. Now, candela is intensity. The candela is the unit of luminous intensity in the International System of Units. It measures luminous power per unit solid angle emitted by a light source in a particular direction. The word candela is Latin for candle. Okay, so the C is for Coulomb's law, which means the force, and the candela, which means the intensity. Okay, so it's the force of the inverted line, the intensity. So when this source, as it disperses out, the intensity is less, is decreased, and so it can disappear. The from the further away from the source, it disappears. Okay, so let's let's bring it all home to my dream. Okay, so these things in the sky I was seeing, and people are seeing them in real life. And I have seen things in the sky as well. And I one day I saw something go by. It was during the day though, and it just kept going, and it disappeared on me. So the fact that in my dream I woke up at 3:07, in my dream that I looked at my clock and it was 3:17 when this thing was happening in the sky, equals to the number 11, and the numbers 10 and 12 mean completeness in God's kingdom. The number 11 falls somewhere in between. It can mean disorder, and judgment, as in Revelation chapter 11, where the two witnesses prophesy. In Hebrews chapter 11, that reminds us to have faith in times of uncertainty and trouble. So, um, I think God does want us to, Jesus does want us to remain faithful when all these things come upon us on the earth. Okay, so because we're in the time of the end. In Revelation chapter 13:13 says, "And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men." Okay, so again, the inverse root law means that there's a light source. When it moves away from the light source, it becomes less and it dims out and it can disappear. So, bottom line here is Jesus is showing us, he showed me in the dream but I'm sharing it with you. He's showing us basically that when we see all these things in the sky, unidentified objects and lights and this and that, when we see all these things in the sky that are supposed to make us feel like they're aliens, they are holograms and lasers. And that's why they disappear. They're there and then they disappear because they're moving further and further away from the light source. We are seeing holograms in many of these instances. We are seeing holograms. Okay. So, and in my dream, I knew in my dream that these were not real aliens. They were like fallen angels and demons and things of that nature. And so these are not real. These are not real UFOs and aliens. Okay. So that was what my dream was showing me, and I wanted to share it with you. And by the way, I have never, ever, ever knew anything about inverse square root. I never knew about that before. I never knew how they did holograms. I never knew any of that stuff. I never knew about physics. I learned that from the dream that Jesus gave me. I had no clue about any of that before. Okay. So that is from Jesus teaching me what is really going on in the sky when we see all these things. Okay, so we are living in the beast system now, ruled by the Antichrist. Yes, absolutely. As mentioned in the book of Daniel, Matthew, and Revelation. So please stay vigilant and God bless. And please keep in mind that these are not real aliens in the sky, and these are not real UFOs. Okay? Thank you, and I love you, and I have more videos coming. Stay blessed. Bye.